what we are handling today is the problem of evil, trying to reconcile the idea of an all-loving, all-powerful God with all the evil and suffering that is here in the world. And so to take us through that today, we've got two very great people. And I'm just going to introduce one of them for now, and then I'm going to introduce the other one later. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have a talk first, and then after the talk, we'll open up the floor for questions. We'll do a Q&A after that. So John Njoroge is the one who's going to deliver the talk, and then after the talk, we'll have Dr. Okello join him as they answer the questions. So John Njoroge is a member of the speaking team at Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. He's not new to many of you here because he's been here doing this several times before. But for the sake of those who do not know, I'm going to do an introduction of him. You may know a bit about Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, which is a global team of speakers whose mission is to help the thinker believe and to help the believer think. I really like it. To help the thinker believe and to help the believer think. And so John is a member of that speaking team. He speaks frequently in universities, in churches, and at conferences. And he is, I never know how to read these Latin things, but let's just say he graduated very well at Talbot School of Theology, where he earned a master's degree in philosophy, a master's degree in New Testament studies, and a master of theology. And he is also in the process of completing his PhD in philosophy from the University of Georgia. And he lives in Atlanta, Georgia, though not for too long after this, with his wife Leah and his two boys. One of his sons is here with him. And so I want you guys to join me in welcoming John Njoroge. Karibu sana, John. But before he comes, I'm supposed to do something here. It's worked. I'm going to play a clip for us, and then John is going to speak.
Good evening. Well, that's an incredible way to set up our topic this evening. And I guess from that clip, we can all see why this is a very important question. And you have come because you care about these types of issues. And the way it's presented by Stephen Fry and many others who are opposed to the idea of God or worshiping God is what we'll be talking about today. And what we want to ask ourselves is this: do those types of things that were mentioned on that video right now, do those types of things justify those of us who believe in God to walk away from God? Should we give up our faith because of these types of ideas? And I'm here to tell you that the answer to that is no. That's what I'll be trying to convince you for the rest of the time. But let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me. I've been here a few times, so there may be some who know who I am. I grew up in Maimahio, not too far from here, and this very topic of evil and suffering was very, very personal and close to me. Because when I was growing up, we had a lot of problems. Before I was about maybe, from the time I was born to about 6 years old, my family was doing very well. I remember I would stand at the door and wait for my dad to come home almost every day. And those were wonderful, wonderful moments for us. Knew nothing about the Bible, nothing about God, nothing about Jesus. Nobody had ever shared the gospel with me. And I did not know anybody among my relatives who was a Christian. And so when I heard about Jesus, the last thing I wanted to do was to become what is normally called a born-again person, because the only people that I knew who were born again were our neighbors, who had some very, very strange customs. The women wore long dresses and covered their hair, and they would never take their kids to the hospital. When they would go to the store to buy toothpaste, they would not say dawa ya meno, they would say sabuni ya meno or something like that, just to avoid any relationship with medicine or being treated. And so many women died of childbirth, and their kids died of easily treatable diseases. And that's what I thought was what it meant to be born again or to be a Christian. And that was the last thing I wanted to do with my life. But my family moved to Kijabi when I was about maybe 13 years old. And there I met people who looked normal. And they also said they were born again. So I wanted to investigate more about Christianity. And I have tried to do this as honestly as possible. I did not know, not having grown up in a Christian home or Christian environment, I did not know that you're not supposed to question what you believe. So I went ahead and questioned what I believe, and I've been doing that ever since. And looking at these types of problems has actually strengthened, not weakened, my faith. It has actually strengthened my faith, and I hope that will be the same for you to do, especially if you've never really taken the time to think about this issue of pain and suffering. If God is good, why is there evil? We can't even say why is there so much evil, because that would mean if there wasn't as much evil, then it would be okay. But if God is all good and all powerful, as we will see, why is there evil at all? That is a question really worth asking. This is normally given as the number one reason why people who are atheists or agnostics reject God, why they don't believe in God. They quote this as the number one reason why they don't believe in God. All over the world, it is a problem of evil, pain, and suffering. So how do those who are honest and still believe in God, how do they explain this issue? How do they deal with it and reconcile it with what they believe about God with their honesty, with an honest look at this problem? Let me begin by dwelling a little bit on the reality of evil. The reality of evil. And I want to convince you here that this is a real problem. That might sound weird to some of you when we say that evil is a real problem, but there are religious and philosophical systems that deny the reality of evil. They don't think of evil the way you and I probably think about evil. And like I said, for many who have thought about it, they use the reality of evil as the number one obstacle to faith in God. The number one obstacle to faith in God. So why talk about the reality of evil? The reason for that is this. As we will see, when you begin to take evil seriously, it drives you to God immediately. And I'll try to justify that as we move along. There is a very well-known skeptic, New Testament scholar in the U.S. His name is Bart Ehrman. He has written many books against God and against the Bible, saying that we really can't trust the Bible because of the process that was used to preserve it. He says it's not trustworthy, it's not reliable. But he wrote another book on the problem of evil, and he said in that book that the real reason he doesn't believe in God is this very problem of evil. This is what he wrote. It's a very long story, but the short version is this. I realized that I could no longer reconcile the claims of faith with the facts of life. In particular, I could no longer explain how there can be a good and all-powerful God actively involved with this world, given the state of things. That's Bart Ehrman in his book, God's Problem, where he talks about the problem of evil. So even he admitted the real issue with his atheism and skepticism is not the process that gave us the Bible. It is this problem of evil and pain and suffering. So it's very, very clear that atheists, people who don't believe in God, have a problem with this issue. They use it to deny God's existence. That's not questioned by many people. What is not clear to some people is that people who are believers also struggle with the problem of evil. People who do believe in God also struggle with the problem of evil, especially when it hits very, very close to home. And there may be some of you right now in this audience who are struggling with this kind of thing. You probably lost a loved one, or there is somebody in the hospital who's been diagnosed with some terminal illness, or something going on right now that is making you question your faith. People who are believers struggle with this question of the problem of evil. It was a real problem for me when I heard about salvation. I heard about Jesus and reading the Bible. When I became a believer, I went to work in Kibera. This will be very, very familiar to all of you in this audience. I went to work in Kibera when I finished high school, working with a missionary from Canada. And what we would do, we would go to the streets. There were many, many street children in Nairobi at that time. We would gather the kids from the street and some from Kibera. We would take them to a church near Ngumo where we would feed them and teach them how to read and write. It actually became a school that is still going on. And I remember when I was invited to go and do this kind of work right after high school, I grew up in very difficult circumstances myself, but I had never seen the kind of evil that I saw right down the street in Kibera. I remember when I moved there, for the first 14 days that I was in Kibera, I was not able to pray at all. I was a Christian, but I could not pray. And this was the reason. There was at night, I had this baby crying at night, and you obviously think there is somebody taking care of this child. But in the morning, we found out it was a newborn baby that a woman had given birth and thrown the baby outside, and the baby cried itself to death through the night. Then a man walking by dug a small hole, and he put the body in and covered it up as if nothing had happened. When I saw that, I had never seen anything like that. When I saw that, the only question that came to my mind was this: how can God let this go on? Is God really there, and does he know that this is happening? I remember my roommate coming home that evening, and he looked at me and he said to me, "Something is wrong with you, what's going on?" And I told him what I had seen. Then the following day, he took me out to the sewer that runs right through Kibera, and he said to me, look inside there. So it was just something like that, and I just looked in there, and he said, "What do you see?" I said, "I see a lot of garbage." He said, "Look more closely." There was another baby in a plastic bag thrown in a ditch like that. And so the question you have to ask yourself is this: if God is there and he really, truly cares, what in the world is going on? Some of you have seen this image. This picture was taken by Stephen Carter from South Africa. It was a picture of a child in Sudan. They had gone there, in South Sudan. They had gone there as journalists to cover what was going on during the famine in the early 90s. And they were told not to touch these people because they could contract diseases. And so he took this picture of a vulture stalking a child who was trying to get to a place where this child could get fed. And he confessed to a friend that he could not live with himself because he never helped this child. He could not live with him, and he ended up taking his life right after he won the Pulitzer Prize for this photo, the most coveted prize anybody can win. This is a serious issue, and I have to confess that as this church, we have not taken the questions that are being asked on these particular issues seriously enough to be able to grapple with them and to begin to answer them. And let me give you one more example. That child that you see there, when I was working in Kibera, just don't look at me, just look at the child. It's a picture of me there. Someone came to us and told us that in this little hut in Kibera, he said there used to be a child who was left by herself. We don't know what happened to the child. Can you go in and find out? So we did. We went in and we found this girl lying on a bed. She had been there sick with no food. We took her to the hospital, to St. Gertrude's, and they told us that this child had less than 6 hours to live. So let me ask you this: if we could break that door down and go in there and find out there was somebody suffering in there, why couldn't God, who is all powerful and all good? What was going on? Where was God when all this was going on? I remember reading a book by Fyodor Dostoevsky called The Brothers Karamazov. In that book, there's a character called Ivan Karamazov, and he's speaking to his brother, Alyosha. And he asks his brother, Alyosha, this question. He says, first of all, before we get to that quote, he says this to his brother: "You are telling me that there really is a God who cares about everybody. Let me ask you this. If you were in God's place, and you were creating a world, you were fashioning a world, would you fashion it, would you make it, if it was necessary to torture just one child to make that world real, make that world exist, would you go ahead and create such a world if those were the conditions that you had to work with?" And his brother said, "No, I would not go ahead and do it." So the question is, why did he go on and create a world with so much evil, so much pain, so much suffering, if he could have done something different? Now, what is recognized, like I said, is this. The people who don't believe in God, people like Stephen Fry, the things he's saying there, everybody recognizes that that's a real problem for non-believers. What they don't seem to realize is this, and he was very criticized by his fellow atheists because of the way he spoke in that clip, because he makes it sound like people who believe in God have never thought about this issue. They're just naive. They just follow God naively. And that is not true. This book, The Brothers Karamazov, was written by Fyodor Dostoevsky, is the strongest statement of the problem of evil that you will find, but it was written by a Christian. He was a believer, and that's actually a classic novel. It's worth reading. Reading. It's called The Brothers Karamazov, if you've never read it. He was criticized by people who thought that he had not thought seriously about the problem of evil. And this was his response. He says, "The dolls have ridiculed my obscurantism and the reactionary character of my faith. These fools could not even conceive so strong a denial of God as the one to which I gave expression. The whole book is an answer to that. You might search Europe in vain for so powerful an expression of atheism. Thus, it is not like a child that I believe in Christ and confess him. My Hosanna has come forth from the crucible of doubt." My Hosanna has come forth from the crucible of doubt. I have looked at these issues squarely in the eyes, and I have come to the conclusion that the best response to it is God, is what he's saying here. So if you ridicule people, if you're in the habit of ridiculing people because you think they haven't thought about it, you can pick somebody on the street, a Christian on the street who have never thought about it, and on that basis, go ahead and criticize them. But if you really want to look at people who have thought about this issue, you do need to do your homework. If you are an atheist, you have to do us the courtesy of doing your homework to be able to deal with this issue and to explain it or to present it in a way that is respectable. Now, for the rest of our time, we are going to begin to clarify the issue here. Begin by clarifying the problem so that we know exactly what we are dealing with and what question we are trying to answer. The problem of evil is normally presented as just one issue that we have to deal with. If there is a God, why is there evil? But it's actually not just one issue that we have to address when we talk about the problem of evil. There are several different ways in which this question is raised. There is, for example, the intellectual problem of evil and the emotional problem of evil. The intellectual problem of evil has to do with logic. And what the skeptic says here is this: there is an inconsistency between believing in God on the one hand and evil on the other hand, so that if you believe in both, you are not being logically consistent. This is just abstract. It's just dealing with ideas. And even this intellectual problem of evil is further divided into several different branches. And one is the logical. Just the use of the laws of logic is supposed to be able to lead you to the conclusion that God doesn't exist. It's not logical to believe in God and evil at the same time, is the argument that's being presented here. Then there is a different version of the problem of evil, and that is the evidential problem of evil. And this goes like this: let's grant that God really, there's no logical contradiction between God and evil. There's no logical contradiction. It still seems to be the case that given the amount of evil that we have in the world, it still makes more sense to think that God doesn't exist than to think that God exists. And this, the claim being made here is this: it's improbable. It may not be logically contradictory, but it's improbable that God exists given all the evil that we have in the world. He could at least eliminate some of them and nothing would change. But since he hasn't done so, there cannot be a God who is all powerful and all good at the same time. So it's improbable that he exists. The logical thing to conclude is that he probably doesn't exist. Now, the emotional problem of evil works in a different way. The emotional problem of evil says this: whether God is there or not, I cannot worship a being who would let such and such happen, who would let Garissa happen, or who would let some of the things that Stephen Fry was talking about happen. And by the way, what he was talking about here had nothing to do with logic. He was completely on the emotional side. That was just an emotional tirade against God. It's an emotional problem of evil. And this is really, really important. I don't want to minimize it. Don't hear me saying that it is not that just because it's emotional, it is not important. Actually, I believe the emotional problem of evil is more important than the logical problem of evil, because this one, the logical side, the intellectual side, is easy to answer. That's not difficult to address. It's been addressed over and over again, as we will see. The emotional part of the problem of evil is much, much more difficult to deal with. But I know of no better way to deal with it than what God has given us in His Word through the Scriptures. So let's look at this a little bit more closely, beginning with the logical problem of evil. The logical problem of evil. It goes something like this. If you want to set it in terms of a premises and a conclusion, it goes something like this. God is omnipotent. That means God is all-powerful. He can do anything He wants to do. God is wholly good. He's all good. And yet, evil exists. And there's supposed to be a logical contradiction among these three propositions. Because if God is omnipotent, if He is all-powerful, He would be able to eliminate evil. If He is all good, He would be willing to eliminate it, and yet evil exists. Now, this problem was stated by a philosopher called J.L. Mackie. The best statement of it you'll find in a book called The Miracle of Theism, which I think is the best defense of atheism out there ever written, The Miracle of Theism. And in that book, he lists this as one of the reasons why he doesn't believe in God. But he was a very, very gifted philosopher, and he knew that there is no contradiction among these three principles. Right now, we don't have a contradiction. In philosophy, please follow me, a contradiction works like this. You say one thing, and then you negate it in the same way. You say, for example, it's raining, and it's not raining. That's a contradiction. But here, you don't have a contradiction. You just have God is all-powerful, God is wholly good, evil exists. There's no contradiction. So what J.L. Mackie did to bring out the contradiction is this. He added two other premises, and they were this. A good thing always eliminates evil as far as it can. A good thing will eliminate evil as far as it can. And the final premise he added was this. There are no limits to what an omnipotent thing can do. And now from those 5 premises, he believed the contradiction is now very, very clear. And it is this, in its simplest form. If God is all-powerful, He would be able to eliminate evil. If He is all good, He would want to do it. And because He hasn't done it, there cannot be a God who is all good and all-powerful at the same time. And then he wrote this in his book. He said this. From this, it follows that a good, omnipotent thing eliminates evil completely, and then the propositions that a good, omnipotent thing exists and that evil exists are incompatible. So that, very simply stated, is the logical problem of evil, the problem that's supposed to lead to the conclusion that God doesn't exist based purely on the power of logic, just thinking logically. That's the problem stated. I hope it's clear. I hope I'm doing it justice so that you can begin to feel how powerful an objection this is before we begin to respond to it. Now, what can we say in response to this problem of evil? What can we say in response to it? Now, we don't have the time to go into this in great detail, because this by itself could take us the rest of the week just dealing with it. So this would be a very, very brief response.